One measure of your cardiovascular health is the Trigs to HDL ratio. And there's two ways that you can improve your ratio if it's bad. You can either change your lifestyle through diet and exercise, or you could take a statin or some other cholesterol-lowering medication. But if you achieve the same ratios with these two different methods, are the results really the same? That's what we'll talk about today. Stay tuned. Triglycerides to HDL ratio is a marker of cardiovascular disease risk. And here we see that there was a comparison made in this study by the Cooper Institute where they looked at not only the ratio but also the cardiovascular health of the particular people who were in the study. And what they found that there was an up to 4 times as high a risk between highly fit individuals who had a very low ratio and unfit individuals who had very high ratio. Now this was a longitudinal study, which is where researchers repeatedly examine the same individuals over time to see what the effects of whatever it is that they're studying. So just if you've seen that term before, that's what it means. So in my case, I generally fell into this category. My ratio now is generally between 1.5 and about 2.25, so I'm well inside this range. On occasion, I have actually gone under 1.5, but in general, my average is a little bit higher. At one point, I was actually in this zone way up here. My ratio was 7.45. That's extremely high. They should have had another category, extremely high. Hard to say really what my condition was. I was exercising occasionally, but you can see that I was in pretty bad shape. By their statistics now, I'm in pretty good shape. How this all came up was I was watching somebody's YouTube channel and somebody had commented inquiring about the Trigs to HDL ratio. How do you compute it? Not a dumb question, because they wanted to make sure that it wasn't HDL divided by Trigs or there was some coefficient or something else that had to be applied. No, and it's simple. It's Trigs divided by HDL. They also wanted to know how to interpret it. So I hopped on and I commented. I said, well, this is how you calculate it. If your value is around 2, that's generally considered good. And this is from memory, but this was approximately their response. It was, oh, well, my ratio is good. It was 2.25 for them. So I'm one of those patients who benefits from statins. I made a non-committal comment because I really didn't have any better information. I'd never thought of this question. Is a low Trigs to HDL ratio achieved through statins as good as achieving it through lifestyle? Well, first we're going to look at my history of my Trigs to HDL ratio. And this I had to gather from my medical records and piece it together. It was not something that I was tracking. I knew nothing about Trigs to HDL when I first started on this. And here you can see over time what had happened when I was on statins. That atorvastatin is Lipitor. I actually have a prior history long time before that. Unfortunately, I don't have that information anymore. I wasn't collecting it at the time. I was on Crestor for a short while. And interestingly, I was on niaspan and Zetia combination, which isn't a statin at all. Niaspan is extended release niacin in Zetia. I was on at that time. And this pitavastatin, which is the green here, is Livalo. And the grayish data points are for when I decided to get serious and change my lifestyle. One of the things I want to point out, though, is what are the thresholds, so to speak. In the US system, where we measure in milligrams per deciliter, 2 is kind of like the gold standard. If you can get under 2, you're doing very well. If you can get under 1, you're doing extremely well. I've never quite gotten under 1. A lot of people do, and they are actually extremely heart healthy. In the UK and other parts of the world where they measure in particle density, millimoles per liter, the thresholds are actually lower. It would be 0.9 would be equivalent to 2 in milligrams per deciliter, and 0.45 would be equivalent to 1. So just keep that in mind if you're using those numbers. So when you make this division, you'll actually get a different number. And the reason for that is that the triglyceride particles do not convert the same as the HDL particles when you go from milligrams per deciliter to millimoles per liter. Now, as I said previously, at one point, I was at my worst when I was at 7.45, and I was on statins, so I wasn't getting anywhere with that. After the niaspan and Zetia experiment, my triglycerides to HDL ratio was actually 1.97. Had problems even on Zetia and niacin. We switched over to Livalo, which was pitavastatin, which was the newest thing that came out. It acted differently than the other statins, and we should try it. Well, what happened? Over time, my ratio went way up. It spiked at one point to nearly 6, but in general was usually up around between 3 and 4. Not good. And at the time that I finally gave up on statins, and I just said, I'm just not taking these anymore, and I changed my lifestyle, you'll see that I actually brought the triglycerides to HDL ratio down to where it was when I was at the end of the niacin and Zetia period. Now, I have more and more measurements. They go off to the right side of the chart here. In general, general, I'm always between like a 1.5 and 2.25. That's really where my ratio stays. So this raises the big question. These two green areas that I've circled here, is a low Triggs to HDL ratio achieved by statins or other drugs as effective as a ratio achieved through lifestyle, meaning diet and exercise? And that's actually a very important question, and that's what we're going to look at here. This is kind of not a scientific survey. I'm just trying to figure it out. But let's see what a risk calculator says. This is the MESA Multi-Ethnic Study of Atherosclerosis Risk Calculator. This is the only risk calculator I found that actually even asks, are you on lipid-lowering medications to achieve whatever numbers that you put in here. If you don't have a coronary artery calcification score, CAC score, you can just put a 0 into this. They will give you two different numbers. This is your risk with a CAC score of 0, and they'll also tell you, and if we didn't know your CAC score, then they'd tell you what your risk would be calculated as. And what I found was, just like with hypertension medications, we find with the other risk calculators, they ask, are you on blood pressure medication? And if you are, your risk for the same number is higher if you're on medication. Being on blood pressure medication and having a systolic blood pressure of 120 is better than an untreated 180, but it's not as good as an untreated 120. It seems to be the same thing here. When you say you're on lipid-lowering medication, for the same numbers, you actually get a higher risk value. And here's just an example. This is not scientific. I was just playing with the calculator. I found that if I said I was on lipid-lowering medications, then a value of 240 was the same as 287 total cholesterol if it was untreated. If you believe, and this is, I'm not arguing this today, this is just a rhetorical discussion here. If you believe that lower cholesterol is better, this risk calculator, and I don't know the basis behind it, but I'm sure they have a big statistical database behind it, is telling you that the lower cholesterol from the medications does not lower your risk the same way your risk would be lowered if you changed your diet and exercise habits and lowered it through natural means. Now let's look at what the Food and Drug Administration in the United States says. In April of 2016, this was reported in Formulary Watch that the FDA pulled cholesterol drugs off the market. Not all cholesterol drugs, but a particular set of cholesterol drugs. And these were combination drugs. It was a combination of extended release niacin with lovastatin, Mevacor, or niacin extended release with simvastatin, which is Zocor. So those two particular products were pulled from the market. And here's the key statement. After reviewing the collective evidence from several large cardiovascular outcome trials, the FDA concluded the totality of scientific evidence no longer supports the conclusion that a drug-induced reduction in triglyceride levels and or an increase in HDL cholesterol levels in statin-treated patients results in a reduction in the risk of cardiovascular events. So in other words, this is saying straight out, because both these things would affect the triglycerides to HDL ratio, the numbers that you achieve artificially, and that's what I'll call it, artificially through the medications, does not reduce your risk. The implication is that if you do it by way of lifestyle, from all the data we've seen, then that would reduce your risk. So what's my conclusion in all of this? Well, first, as with hypertension medications, the action from statins does not provide the same risk reduction per unit decrease, in other words, for the decrease that you get in cholesterol, as may be achieved by lifestyle. Now, I do want to address the whole thing about the lowering cholesterol, because that's the other point of my conclusion, and that is that the lifestyle changes resulting in improvements in Lp(a), Trigs, HDL, LDL pattern, and oxidized LDL are going to be far more effective than statins. Here, I'm not talking about reductions in LDL. I'm talking about qualitative changes in your LDL. For example, if you were LDL pattern B and you change your lifestyle and it migrated over to LDL pattern A, that's an improvement. That's the quick answer to this. I know it wasn't scientific. It's what I could come up with because the question really interested me. So that's what I've got on this topic. If you appreciate this content, please like, share, subscribe, and comment on this topic or others you'd like me to cover. And if you haven't seen this video, I recommend you take a look at it now. Thanks for listening.